The gate had seen stranger things than most people could imagine. It had swallowed soldiers and scientists whole, spat them out on jungle worlds and desert moons, accepted offerings of MALP probes, and returned nothing but static. It had opened to Goa'uld attack waves and Asgard diplomatic transmissions and, once, a very confused flock of alien birds. Sergeant Walter Harriman had logged approximately 400 unscheduled off-world activations in his career at Cheyenne Mountain, and he had developed what General Hammond generously called composure in the face of impossible events. What came through the gate at 03:47 hours on a Tuesday tested that composure considerably. The chevrons had locked without warning. No MALP signal, no IDC, or no Tok'ra frequency handshake. Just the gate spinning on its own like something on the other side had grabbed it by the throat and demanded it cooperate. Harriman had slammed the klaxon before the 7th chevron locked. SF teams were in position, P90s raised, before the kawoosh erupted and the event horizon settled into its familiar blue shimmer. Then Lord Shaxx stepped through. He filled the gate the way very few things did. Not just physically, though physically he was extraordinary, over 7 feet of ancient battle-scarred armor that looked like it had been forged from a dying star and then argued with for several centuries. He filled it with presence. The kind of presence that made trained soldiers instinctively reassess their positions. He stumbled on arrival, gate travel clearly not a familiar sensation, caught himself on one massive gauntleted hand against the ramp, and straightened with the practiced dignity of someone who refused to acknowledge that stumbling had occurred. His helmet swept the gate room, weapons trained on him from every angle. Red lights strobed. The iris was already cycling behind him, cutting off whatever had sent him here. Said Lord Shaxx. Then, after a moment of genuine assessment, interesting facility. In the control room above, General George Hammond set down his coffee cup with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing not to panic. Through the reinforced glass, he watched his security teams holding position around something that their standard protocols had absolutely no framework for. Whatever this being was, no gate had ever been cataloged. Get me no gate had ever been cataloged. Get me Dr. Fraser, Hammond said, and wake up SG-1. Shaxx did not resist containment. This was either very reassuring or, as Colonel Jack O'Neill muttered to Carter on the way down to the gate room, the kind of confident that means he's already figured out 12 ways to leave. He stood in the center of the gate room with his arms at his sides while SF teams maintained their perimeter, and he observed everything with the systematic attention of someone who had spent centuries learning to read a battlefield in seconds. His armor was unlike anything in Carter's experience, and her experience now included Goa'uld, Asgard, Talon, and ancient technology. And the metal, if it was metal, seemed to absorb the gate room's fluorescent lighting rather than reflect it, surfaces worn smooth in some places and deeply scarred in others. Geometric patterns traced across the pauldrons, almost ritualistic. And from somewhere within the chest plate, a faint luminescence pulsed in slow rhythm. Not mechanical, not electrical. Alive. I'm Colonel Jack O'Neill, Jack said, stopping at the base of the ramp. This is our facility. You came through our gate without an invitation, which, for the record, we usually frown on. Lord Shaxx, the armored figure replied. The voice was deep as a tectonic event and somehow carried warmth beneath the authority. Crucible Handler, Titan. And I apologize for the entry. The transit was not my choice. Something pulled me through. A pause. Yeah, your dimensional transit system is crude but effective. I would not have thought it capable of an interdimensional breach. It's not, Carter said, frowning. Theoretically, anyway. Then something made it capable. Shaxx turned his helmet toward her with what felt, despite the full visor, like direct eye contact. You should find out what? Jack glanced at Carter. Carter was already doing math in her head. This was a familiar pattern. Dr. Fraser arrived in the gate room at a controlled jog, medical kit over one shoulder, expression professionally neutral in the way that meant she was internally cataloging 17 concerns simultaneously. She looked up at Shaxx, then further up. I'll need to run some tests, she said. You will find my biology uncooperative with standard assessment tools, Shaxx said, not unkindly. But I will not obstruct your process. A healer's work is worth respecting. Fraser blinked. In her experience, people either loved or hated the infirmary. The ones who called her a healer unprompted were rare. Thank you, that's actually very refreshing. They put him in a secure briefing room, the one with the reinforced walls they'd added after the entity incident, while Hammond convened a rapid assessment with SG-1. The debate was predictable in its structure, if not its specifics. Daniel argued for open communication, Jack argued for caution, Carter argued for a scanner array she wanted to build, and Teal'c said nothing for several minutes before delivering his opinion with characteristic economy. He carries himself as a warrior who has never lost faith in his purpose, Teal'c said. I have served among Jaffa for many decades, and I have met Goa'uld, who wore divinity-like armor. This being is neither. His confidence comes from experience, not arrogance. A beat? He did not attempt to escape, though the opportunity presented itself 3 times. Hammond looked at the security footage on the briefing room monitor. Shaxx sat at the table, which creaked audibly under his presence, and was studying the wall with apparent genuine interest, as though memorizing the facility's structural layout for future reference. He's cataloging the base, Jack said. He is also, Teal'c noted, allowing us to observe him doing it, deliberately. Hammond folded his hands. Outside Cheyenne Mountain, the sun was not yet up, and somewhere in another dimension, apparently, something had decided that this Tuesday needed to be significantly more complicated. He had long ago stopped asking why these things happened on his watch. All right, he said. Let's go talk to him. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed, the briefing room table had survived a replicator incursion, 2 near ascensions, and 1 memorable incident involving a Goa'uld symbiote and a very unlucky airman. It had not, until this morning, been required to support the full-seated weight of Lord Shaxx, and it was communicating its displeasure through a sustained low groan that everyone in the room was professionally pretending not to hear. Hammond took the chair at the head of the table. SG-1 arranged themselves in their familiar configuration. Jack leaning back with arms crossed, Carter with a tablet she was already filling with observations, Daniel with a notepad because Daniel always had a notepad, and Teal'c standing at the corner with his hands clasped behind his back. A Shaxx sat opposite Hammond, and somehow managed to make the posture look natural, despite the geometry being entirely wrong for a being his size. I'll be direct, Hammond began. I prefer it, Shaxx said. You arrived through our gate from an unregistered address, via a mechanism we don't fully understand yet. You're carrying weapons. Hammond nodded toward the substantial blade secured at Shaxx's back and the sidearm holstered at his hip. Which you haven't drawn. You've cooperated with our security teams. That cooperation is noted and appreciated. What I need to understand is who you are, where you came from, and whether whatever sent you here is going to send anything else. Shaxx was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to briefings, to rooms full of people who needed information organized into something actionable. I am Lord Shaxx. I have served as a guardian of the last city on Earth, my Earth, for several centuries. My role is combat instruction, force evaluation, and the defense of humanity against extinction-level threats. I did not choose to come here. The transition was involuntary and violent. He paused. As for what sent me, in my last moment before transit, I was standing inside a Vex temporal anomaly of unusual scale. Something interacted with it. Something that did not originate from Vex technology. Carter's pen stopped moving. Something interacted with a temporal anomaly from outside and used it as a transit mechanism? That is my assessment. That's... Carter started calculating out loud before catching herself. That's not supposed to be possible with our gate technology. And yet, Shaxx said simply. Daniel leaned forward. In any first contact situation, Daniel's instinct was to find the shared language, the common framework. You mentioned your Earth, your version of Earth. Is it recognizable? Geographically, I mean. Largely. though much of it has been reclaimed by wilderness. The last city exists beneath a sphere we call the Traveler, a vast artificial construct that appeared over Earth centuries ago and fundamentally altered what humanity was capable of. He tilted his helmet toward Daniel. I suspect that detail is significant to your interest in ancient civilizations and alien technology. Daniel sat back slowly. Yes, that's extremely significant. Guardians, Teal'c said. It was the first word he'd offered since entering the room. You use this term for yourself. Define it. Shaxx turned his full attention to Teal'c with the focused regard of one combat professional assessing another. A guardian is a warrior resurrected by the Traveler's light and charged with the defense of humanity. We are not immortal in the conventional sense. We can be killed. But death is not permanent for us, provided our ghost survives. A beat. I note I arrived without my ghost. That is a complication. Ghost, Jack said. Your ghost is like a companion. I construct that interfaces with technology. I resurrects me when I fall, and generally tells me things I already know in a tone that implies I don't. Something in Shaxx's voice suggested profound affection beneath the complaint. Without it, I am operating at reduced capacity. My light remains, the fundamental energy that powers my abilities. But I cannot be resurrected if killed in this dimension. The room processed that. Hammond's expression did not change, which was itself a kind of expression. Dr. Fraser's preliminary scans, Carter said carefully, detected an energy signature in your chest cavity that didn't match any known power source. Bioluminescent, but not biological. We're calling it light for now because you called it light and we don't have a better term yet. An accurate term. The scans also showed interaction between that signature and trace naquadah in the air recycling system. Naquadah is a mineral element, present in your gate construction and, based on atmospheric trace levels, your weapon systems. Shaxx nodded slowly. I noticed the interference. My precision light casting has been inconsistent since arrival. Heavy application appears unaffected. Carter stared at him. You diagnosed a quantum interference pattern with an unknown energy source in under an hour without instrumentation. I have been fighting impossible things for a very long time, Major. You learn to take stock of your limitations quickly, or you do not survive to learn anything else. Jack uncrossed his arms. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Carter recognized it. It was the movement Jack made when he'd made a preliminary decision about someone. Okay, he said. Here's where we are. You're stuck here, at least until Carter figures out what pulled you through and whether it's going to be a problem. You've got abilities we don't understand yet, and a biology that's making our CMO professionally frustrated. You've got no way home and no backup. He let that sit for a second. How are you handling that? Shaxx's helmet tilted very slightly. I have stood at the edge of human extinction more times than I can count, Colonel. I have watched Titans hold walls that should not have held. I have trained Guardians who walked into impossible situations and found a way. The luminescence in his chest plate pulsed once, steady and certain. I will be useful to you. That is how I handle it. Hammond looked at Jack. Jack looked at Hammond. 3 decades of military service passed between them in approximately 1 second. Get him a base access badge, Hammond said. Temporary. And someone find him a chair that isn't going to file a complaint. The SGC gymnasium existed in a perpetual state of controlled aggression. It smelled of rubber mats and effort, its fluorescent lights slightly too harsh for comfort, its equipment practical rather than modern. SG teams used it to maintain the kind of fitness that kept people alive on worlds where the atmosphere was wrong or the locals were hostile, or both simultaneously. It was not, by any conventional measure, an impressive facility. Teal'c had spent considerable time in it anyway. He found that rigorous physical training served the same purpose here that Kelnorim served for his mind. It organized things, clarified priorities, burned away the noise. He was midway through a staff weapon kata when Shaxx appeared in the doorway, ducking slightly to clear the frame, and stopped to watch with the evaluative stillness of a man who assessed combat forms the way others read text. Your form is efficient, Shaxx said. Military, practical, no wasted motion. I was trained by Bratak, Teal'c replied, not stopping. He did not permit wasted motion. Good teacher. The finest I have known. Teal'c completed the sequence and lowered the staff. You observed the kata from beginning. You were timing the rotational transitions. Habit. Shaxx entered the room fully, moving with surprising economy for his size. I have trained thousands of guardians. You learn to identify where a fighter's instincts end and their training begins. The gap between the two is where they die. He studied the staff weapon with evident interest. Goa'uld design. Energy-based. Inaccurate at range. Devastating at close quarters. Psychologically intimidating. You are familiar with Goa'uld technology? I read the files Colonel O'Neill provided this morning. All of them. A pause that might have contained amusement. He seemed surprised I finished. Teal'c inclined his head. He is frequently surprised by competence. It is not a criticism. He simply expects less from others than he expects from himself. He set the staff aside. You wish to spar? It wasn't a question. Shaxx's posture had shifted in the way postures shifted when a decision had already been made and was merely waiting for acknowledgement. I need to calibrate, Shaxx said. Understand what this Naquata interference actually cost me in close combat. I cannot do that against equipment. He looked at Teal'c with direct and uncomplicated respect. Yes, you are the most capable hand-to-hand combatant in this facility. Possibly one of the most capable I have encountered from a non-Guardian baseline. You are baiting me with flattery. I am stating an assessment. I do not flatter. Another pause. I do occasionally motivate through enthusiasm, but that is different. Teal'c almost smiled. Indeed. What followed was not, technically, an authorized training exercise. It also drew approximately 14 observers within the first 3 minutes, including Carter with a scanner, Daniel with his notepad, and Jack with a cup of coffee, and the expression of a man watching something he would later claim he had officially sanctioned. Shaxx fought the way ancient things fought, with the accumulated weight of centuries of refinement pressing behind every movement. He was extraordinarily fast for his mass, closing distance with a Titan's ground-swallowing aggression, and his striking power was at a level that forced Teal'c to abandon his standard defensive strategy entirely within the first exchange. The first time Teal'c's counter-throw connected, Shaxx absorbed it, adjusted his center of gravity mid-fall, and came back up from the mat like the floor had simply offered him a tactical pause. But Teal'c was Teal'c, first prime of Apophis, student of Bratak. A man who had fought System Lords and Replicators, and, once, a version of himself from an alternate timeline, which had been philosophically uncomfortable in ways he still occasionally considered. He read Shaxx's patterns with the patient attention of a master, found the half-second rhythmic tell in the Titan's weight distribution, and used it twice in succession to redirect rather than resist. They stopped by mutual unspoken agreement after 20 minutes, both breathing harder than either would readily admit, and the gymnasium was entirely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. You found the tell, Shaxx said. In the 7th exchange, you favor the left shoulder when initiating a power sequence, fractionally, enough. The Naquata interference, Shaxx said, and there was something that might have been irritation in his voice, directed inward, not outward. My light-enhanced transitions are slightly delayed. I am compensating with mechanical movement, and it is creating a pattern. He straightened. I did not notice it until you exploited it. Now you have noticed it. Now I have noticed it. Shaxx looked at Teal'c for a long moment. Yes, you were enslaved by the Goa'uld for decades, and you still fight with this much. He seemed to search for the precise word, joy. Teal'c considered that. A warrior who does not find meaning in the fight becomes hollow. I have seen what hollow warriors become. He picked up a towel from the bench. I did not fight with joy while I served Apophis. I fought with duty. The joy came later, when the duty became my own choice. Shaxx was quiet in the way large things were quiet when something had landed precisely where it needed to land. From the doorway, Jack watched this exchange with the evaluative attention he applied to everything important while appearing to apply none. He took a sip of coffee. Beside him, Carter was reviewing her scanner readings with barely contained excitement. His light output during physical exertion increased 40% above baseline, she murmured. It responds to combat the way a muscle responds to load. It gets stronger under pressure. Of course it does, Jack said. The Naquata interference is actually creating a feedback effect, like resistance training. The harder he pushes against the interference, the more efficiently his light compensates. She looked up. Jack, if he keeps operating in a Naquata-rich environment, the interference might not weaken him. It might make him stronger. In the gymnasium, Shaxx had picked up Teal's staff weapon and was examining it with the focused attention of a man already thinking about what could be done with it. Jack finished his coffee. Let's give him a gate address. P4X639 had been on the mission rotation for 3 weeks, flagged by MALP reconnaissance as a temperate world with breathable atmosphere, visible ruins of probable ancient or pre-Goa'uld origin, and no immediate sign of hostile activity. The MALP had not detected the 24 Jaffa who arrived through a second gate on the planet's far continent approximately 18 hours after the probe's sweep, established a forward camp in the ruins, and began the systematic process of enslaving the local agricultural population in the name of Anubis. SG-1 stepped through into morning light and immediately knew the MALP data was outdated. The smoke on the eastern horizon was the first indication. The distant sound of staff weapon discharge was the second. Shaxx was through the gate before the wormhole finished delivering the rest of the team, now his helmet already sweeping the terrain with the rapid tactical assessment of someone who had dropped into hostile zones across dozens of worlds and learned to read a battlefield in the first 3 seconds or accept the consequences. 2 kilometers east, he said. Staff weapons. Multiple discharge points. I count at least 8 distinct firing positions. Civilians in the impact zone based on the scatter pattern of the return fire, which is light and irregular. Carter checked her scanner. He's right. Life signs consistent with a large group, mostly stationary. Several armed signatures moving through the settlement perimeter. Jaffa patrol pattern, Teal'c said, his jaw tight. Anubis uses a 3-point cordon when processing a new labor acquisition. They will have the population centralized within the hour. Jack looked at Shaxx. And this was, technically, the Titan's first off-world mission. The briefing had covered gate protocols, GDO procedures, the specific cultural and tactical context of Goa'uld occupation, and the SGC's operational approach to first contact and intervention. It had been thorough. Shaxx had asked 2 questions, both tactically precise, and had otherwise listened with the absolute attention of someone filing everything for immediate use. You good? Jack asked. I have been ready since the briefing room, Shaxx said. Right. Carter, Daniel, you're with me on the northern approach. Teal'c, take Shaxx on the eastern flank. Teal'c's lead, Shaxx. Jack paused with the slight hesitation of a man issuing restraint orders to a force of nature. Measured response. Understood, Shaxx said. Though I reserve the right to define measured contextually. That's going to be a conversation later. The village was a collection of stone buildings arranged around a central well, the architecture suggesting a population that had been seeded here by Goa'uld perhaps 2,000 years ago and left largely to develop independently since. The people were human, frightened, and currently being herded toward the village center by 9 Jaffa in Anubis's black and gray armor, staff weapons leveled, while a 10th read from a proclamation scroll in heavily accented Goa'uld that Daniel could have translated from the northern tree line and which Teal'c translated quietly for Shaxx without being asked. They are being claimed as servants of Anubis. Resistance will be met with demonstration of his divine power. Teal'c's voice was flat with the particular flatness of someone managing a specific and well-practiced anger. They use this script on every world. Shaxx watched the Jaffa herding terrified farmers with the focused stillness of someone passing judgment. These warriors, they believe it, that their God is real. Most of them, yes, they were born into it. And the people being herded? They will believe it too, given sufficient time and sufficient terror. A pause. It is how the Goa'uld have maintained dominion over hundreds of worlds for thousands of years. Shaxx said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, I find this deeply offensive. As do I, Teal'c said. Every day. Jack's voice came through the radio. Teal'c, we're in position north. On your mark. Teal'c keyed the radio. Mark. SG-1 opened up from the north with P-90 suppression fire, and the Jaffa cordon broke predictably, half turning to engage the new threat, half moving to secure the civilians as living cover. It was a textbook Goa'uld response, which meant it was also a textbook vulnerability. Shaxx moved. He crossed 40 meters of open ground in the time it took the nearest Jaffa to register the movement and attempt to bring his staff weapon to bear, which was not enough time. The staff weapon discharge went wide, scorching a line across the stone wall behind Shaxx's shoulder, and then Shaxx was inside the Jaffa's guard and the fight had changed character entirely. He did not use his light. He used weight, leverage, and the accumulated mechanical knowledge of centuries, dismantling the nearest 3 Jaffa with a controlled efficiency that left them incapacitated and breathing, which was a choice, and everyone watching understood it was a choice. The remaining Jaffa on the eastern side had the rare collective instinct to regroup rather than press individually, which was tactically sound and practically insufficient. Teal'c took the flank, staff weapon against staff weapon, and between them the eastern cordon was neutralized in under 90 seconds. Across the village, Jack's P-90 fire and Carter's precision shooting had handled the northern group. 2 Jaffa had retreated toward a Teltak cargo ship concealed in a field beyond the village. Teal'c marked their direction without needing to look. The civilians stood in the village center, stunned by the sudden silence. A child near the well was staring at Shaxx with enormous eyes, clearly uncertain whether the armored giant was better or worse than what had come before. Shaxx crouched, the motion bringing him closer to the child's level, the armor suddenly seeming less enormous somehow. "You are safe," he said, in English that Daniel would need to translate, but with a tone that required no translation whatsoever. The child grabbed his gauntlet with both hands. Daniel, arriving from the northern approach, stopped and looked at Jack. Jack looked back at him with an expression that said several things simultaneously and none of them out loud. The debrief lasted 2 hours and generated 17 pages of mission notes. A minor diplomatic incident involving Daniel's attempt to explain the SGC's non-intervention policy to a village elder who had just watched 5 Jaffa get dismantled by an armored giant, and one very specific notation in Hammond's personal log that read, "Asset demonstrates exceptional restraint under fire. Also exceptional everything else. NID cannot learn about this." Shaxx sat through the debrief with the patience of someone who understood that paperwork was the price of operational freedom. He answered questions directly, offered tactical observations where relevant, and did not comment on the portions of SGC protocol that he found philosophically questionable, which Jack privately noted was more professional courtesy than most new SG members managed in their first month. It was Daniel who raised the thing everyone had been arranged around. "The Jaffa you engaged. The ones you left conscious." He chose his words with the careful precision he applied to translations of things that mattered. "You could have used your light abilities. You chose not to." "The Naquata interference makes precision difficult," Shaxx said. "I did not want to risk collateral damage near civilians." "That was part of it," Daniel said. "What was the rest?" A pause that had weight to it. "They are slaves who believe they are soldiers. Killing them serves Anubis. It removes nothing from his power base that he cannot replace, and it denies them the possibility of becoming something else." He looked at Teal'c. Yeah, Teal'c was first prime of Apophis. He believed. Then he chose otherwise. The room was quiet. "I have trained warriors who came to me broken by false purpose," Shaxx continued. "The Crucible does not ask what you were. It asks what you are willing to become." He settled back. "I do not waste what might become useful." Teal'c's expression remained composed in the way it composed itself around things that struck him precisely and personally. "You are more considered than your reputation suggested," he said. "My reputation," Shaxx said, "involves a great deal of shouting." "It does," Teal'c agreed. "Indeed." The Tok'ra made contact 48 hours later, which was faster than Hammond expected and faster than Jack preferred. The transmission came through a standard Tok'ra frequency with Jacob Carter's IDC attached. which meant Hammond had to take it seriously regardless of his instinct to give SG one more time to consolidate before the galaxy's intelligence network noticed their new asset. Jacob arrived through the gate looking like a man carrying two agendas simultaneously, which was accurate both literally and figuratively. Selmak's influence showed in the slight deliberateness of his movements, the way he processed the room in layers. He stopped when he saw Shaxx. "Well," Jacob said, "Selmak says hello and also that her intelligence reports significantly undersold this situation." "Your intelligence reports are noted," Shaxx said pleasantly. Jacob walked a slow half-circle, not quite circling but observing from varied angles with the practiced casualness of a spy who had operated inside Goa'uld courts for years. The energy signature our operatives detected from P4X639 during the engagement. We've been trying to classify it for 36 hours. It doesn't match any known Goa'uld, Ancient, or Asgard signature. "It is light," Shaxx said. "Traveler-derived. I would not expect your classification systems to have a category for it." "No," Jacob agreed, "which is exactly the problem." He glanced at Hammond. "Anubis has a problem too. His field commander on P4X639 survived and reported back. Anubis now has a description of a being who moved faster than Jaffa could track, shrugged off staff weapon fire, and dismantled his soldiers with what the commander described as—" Jacob checked a small data tablet, the calm of someone performing a task already completed in their mind. Jack looked at Shaxx. "He's not wrong. Anubis does not ignore anomalies," Jacob continued. "He collects them, studies them. Half-ascended as he is, he has a particular interest in energy signatures that suggest proximity to ancient power levels." He paused to let that land. "He's already dispatched an intelligence operative to identify and acquire the source." "Acquire," Carter said. "His preferred method is making things hosts. For things that can't be made hosts, his second preference is dissection." Jacob's tone remained professionally even. "Neither outcome benefits anyone in this room." Hammond leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Jacob?" "We have an operative currently embedded in the court of System Lord Kaylee. Then Kaylee has recently received a communication from Anubis requesting intelligence sharing on an anomalous energy source detected in Goa'uld claimed space." Jacob set the data tablet on the table. "If we can get someone into that intelligence exchange before Anubis's operative does, we intercept what Anubis knows and what he's planning before he acts on it." "Deep cover," Carter said, "inside a System Lord's court." "Briefly," Jacob said, with the specific optimism of Tok'ra operatives who had redefined the word briefly through years of field experience. Jack looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression he wore when calculating how much trouble a plan was likely to generate versus how necessary it was. It was a calculation that rarely resolved in the direction of comfort. "How briefly," he said. "Are we talking?" 48 hours, in and out before Anubis's people arrive." Jacob looked at Shaxx. "We'd need you to dampen the light signature, reduce your energy output to baseline." "I can limit my active output," Shaxx said. "The passive signature is less controllable." "Less controllable meaning?" "Meaning any Goa'uld with half-ascended perception in a 50-meter radius will eventually notice something is unusual about me." He paused. "Though I am told I have a commanding presence even without supernatural indicators." No one in the room disputed this. Kali's court operated out of a haytok in geosynchronous orbit above a mineral world called Nasut, which had the particular distinction of being both strategically valueless and politically neutral enough that System Lords occasionally used its orbit for exchanges they didn't want attributed to their primary holdings. Jacob had described it as the Goa'uld equivalent of a parking lot, which Daniel found reductive but accurate. The cover was straightforward by Tok'ra standards, which meant it was extremely dangerous by any other standard. Jacob and Selmak would attend as themselves, a known Tok'ra operative whose presence Kaylee tolerated because Selmak carried intelligence she occasionally found useful. Carter would attend as a human servant, in a role she accepted with the tight professionalism of someone setting aside considerable personal objection for operational necessity. Teal'c could not attend. His face was too well known in Goa'uld courts as the traitor First Prime. Jack remained at SGC coordinating extraction. Daniel remained because his Goa'uld was excellent, but his expressions when confronted with slavery and false divinity were, as Jack delicately phrased it, a liability. Shaxx attended as something the Tok'ra had no precise category for and ultimately listed in the mission documentation as specialist consultant, which was the kind of designation that meant whatever the situation required it to mean. The ring transporter deposited them in Kaylee's receiving corridor. Arts a long passage of ornate Naquadah paneling lit by wall-mounted staff weapon housings that served as both lighting and implicit threat. Kali's Jaffa guards wore gold and black, their helmets styled after Kali's chosen deity form, multi-armed, severe, precise. They assessed the arriving party with the professional suspicion of warriors trained to be paranoid and rewarded for it. Shaxx had reduced his active light output to the minimum sustainable level. It cost him something. Carter's scanner had shown the effort required, the way his energy signature compressed inward like a contained fire. But he held it with the discipline of a man who had learned that the most powerful thing a warrior could do was choose precisely when not to be powerful. He was still, unavoidably, enormous. "Your servant is large," said Kaylee's herald, or a thin man with the slightly unfocused eyes of someone managing a Goa'uld's reflected ego on a daily basis. "He is effective," Jacob said, with the comfortable authority of Selmak borrowing Jacob's face, which is the relevant quality. Kaylee received them in her throne room, and Shaxx observed her with the analytical attention he'd applied to everything since arrival, cataloging, assessing, filing. She was beautiful in the constructed way Goa'uld were beautiful, her host carefully chosen, her bearing the practiced performance of divinity. But behind the performance, visible to anyone who knew how to look, was the cold and restless intelligence of a parasite who had survived thousands of years through calculation rather than power. She was dangerous. Shaxx noted this the way he noted all dangerous things, without alarm, with respect, even with immediate tactical adjustment. The intelligence exchange proceeded through Jacob's established protocol, Tok'ra offering navigational data on replicator movements in exchange for Kaylee's sensor logs from the sector containing P4X639. Carter worked the data exchange on a handheld device, her expression neutral, her eyes moving to the room's secondary exits at intervals Shaxx noted approvingly. It was proceeding cleanly until Kaylee's Lotor, her personal human servant, a young woman moving with the careful quietness of someone who had learned that invisibility was survival, stumbled on the throne room steps and dropped a ceremonial vessel that shattered against the Naquadah floor with a sound like a small detonation. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room full of people calculating consequences. McCallie turned from the data exchange with the measured slowness of a predator, deciding whether the interruption merited immediate response. Her ribbon device caught the light. Shaxx moved before the calculation completed. Not aggressively. He stepped between Kaylee's sightline and the Lotor with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided where they were standing and was simply standing there, his bulk creating an architectural fact in the throne room's geometry. "The vessel slipped," he said. His voice was level and carried no apology. "These things occur." The room held its breath. Kaylee studied Shaxx with the focused attention she'd been withholding since their arrival, and something shifted behind her eyes, the Goa'uld's predator intelligence engaging fully for the first time. She raised the ribbon device slowly, not activating it, merely holding it in the space between them as a question. "You are not a servant," she said. "No," Shaxx agreed. "What are you?" "Something your intelligence files do not have a category for," he said. "Yet." The ribbon device hummed at low activation. Shaxx felt it. The Naquadah channeled telekinetic pressure at the edges of his armor, probing for weakness. His light responded instinctively, the passive signature flaring before he contained it. Not enough to constitute an attack. Enough to register. Kaylee's eyes widened by a fraction that would have been invisible to anyone not watching for exactly that response. Jacob stepped smoothly into the silence. "The data exchange is complete. Now we'll conclude the arrangement as discussed." Kaylee lowered the ribbon device with the deliberateness of someone making a choice they intended to revisit. Indeed, she said, and the word in her mouth carried nothing of Teal'c's warmth, only assessment and the particular patience of a system lord filing something away for future use. In the ring transporter on the way out, Carter exhaled quietly. She's going to report to Anubis, she murmured. She already has, Jacob said. The transmission went out 30 seconds after Shaxx blocked her sightline. Shaxx said nothing. The Lotor had been escorted out by a guard who, based on trajectory, was taking her somewhere other than punishment. He had watched until he was certain. Sometimes that was what measured response looked like. The Teltac dropped out of hyperspace 12 minutes ahead of schedule, which Jacob said meant Anubis's operative had already arrived at the rendezvous coordinates and was actively scanning. Carter recalibrated the cargo ship's sensor mask while Jacob flew, and Shaxx sat in the rear compartment reviewing everything the Tok'ra intelligence package had contained about Anubis, which was considerable and consistently alarming. Half ascended. That was the operative term. Anubis had achieved partial ascension through means the ancients had not sanctioned and subsequently been cast back to a physical existence that was no longer entirely physical. A being of immense knowledge trapped in a form that was simultaneously more and less than human. He understood ancient technology not as reverse-engineered discovery but as memory. He did not guess at ancient systems. He remembered them. Shaxx read this and was quiet for a long time. He was given power he did not earn, he said finally. Jacob glanced back from the pilot seat. That's one way to put it. In my experience, beings given power they did not earn through struggle develop a specific kind of blindness. They understand force but not cost. They know what their power does but not what it means. Shaxx set the data tablet down. That is a vulnerability. Anubis has defeated system lords, survived multiple apparent deaths, and constructed a weapon capable of destroying a planet, Carter said carefully. Yes, Shaxx said. And yet here we are, still fighting him. Which means his power has limits his understanding cannot compensate for. He paused. What is the weapon? Carter pulled up the schematics on her screen. Partial intelligence gathered over 2 years of Tok'ra surveillance, enough to understand the shape of the threat if not every technical detail. A satellite weapon system powered by a modified zero-point module, capable of destroying planetary surfaces. Anubis had acquired an ancient ZPM and spent 3 years learning to weaponize it. Shaxx studied the schematics. He is using an ancient power source incorrectly. Incorrectly how? Carter asked, with the sharp attention she applied to anything that suggested a weapon solution. A ZPM, based on this configuration, is designed for sustained energy distribution across complex systems. He is forcing it into a single-point discharge weapon. That requires containment architecture the original design does not support. Shaxx traced the schematic with one finger. He has compensated with additional Naquada shielding here and here, which means the weapon has a charging interval and a structural vulnerability during discharge that his own design created. Carter stared at the screen, then at Shaxx. How do you know this? I have spent centuries learning how power sources fail under misapplication. It is relevant to my work. A beat. Your Samantha Carter would have found this herself within the hour. I am simply observing what the data shows. Carter turned back to the screen with the expression of someone simultaneously pleased by the analysis and mildly irritated at the timeline compression. Yet the Teltac completed its approach to the coordinates Jacob had identified. A desolate moon in unclaimed space that Tok'ra intelligence had flagged as a potential Anubis logistics waypoint. What the sensors showed when they dropped out of hyperspace was considerably more than a logistics waypoint. 3 Haytok vessels in loose formation. A Supergate construction platform, incomplete but structurally significant. And at the center of the formation, a structure that didn't match any Goa'uld architectural template in the SGC database. Smooth, pale, geometric in the precise way ancient construction was geometric, but modified, augmented, forced into configurations that made Carter's expression tighten with the specific discomfort of someone watching something beautiful being used badly. That's not a weapons platform, she said quietly. No, Jacob agreed. Selmac believes it is an ascension accelerator. Anubis is attempting to replicate the conditions of his own partial ascension artificially. He paused. At scale. He wants to ascend an army, Shaxx said, or force ascension on unwilling subjects to harvest the energy release. Selmak is not certain which. Both are consistent with what we're seeing. Shaxx looked at the structure for a long moment. The luminescence in his chest plate had shifted. Less the steady pulse of baseline operation, more the slow burn of something building toward a decision. In my universe, he said, we encountered beings who attempted to weaponize the process of apotheosis, the transition between what a being is and what it might become. His voice had dropped to a register that wasn't quite quiet but carried the weight of specific memory. It never produced gods. It produced suffering at a scale that took generations to address. Anubis doesn't care about suffering, Jacob said. No, but he should care about structural instability. Shaxx turned to Carter. The Ascension Accelerator will require a ZPM to power the initial sequence, the same ZPM vulnerability you identified in the weapon schematics. If the power source is interrupted during the activation sequence, the feedback cascade would destroy the accelerator, Carter finished, and potentially damage the Haytak formation. She was already calculating. But to interrupt it, we'd need to be inside the structure's shielding perimeter during the activation window, which means someone goes in before it activates, Shaxx said. Me disables the ZPM from inside. That is a description of a suicide mission, Jacob said flatly. It is a description of a difficult mission, Shaxx replied. I have found the difference between those two things is usually preparation and speed. He looked at Carter. How long would the actual ZPM interruption take, assuming access? Carter did the math quickly and visibly. 90 seconds, maybe less with the right tools. Shaxx stood, his head clearing the Teltax ceiling by less than was comfortable. Then we have a plan. Contact O'Neill. Tell him we need extraction coordinates and a very precise window. Jacob looked at Selmak's reflection in the cockpit glass for a moment. She says you remind her of someone. Someone effective, I hope. Someone stubborn, Jacob said. She means it as a compliment. The ring transporter deposited Shaxx and Carter inside the accelerator structure with exactly the subtlety their situation required, which was none. Tok'ra operative Malik had confirmed the structure's internal ring network was still slave to standard Goa'uld transport protocols. Anubis had not yet integrated his ancient modifications into the ship's defensive grid. That window would close the moment activation sequencing began. They had 19 minutes. The interior was wrong in the way things were wrong when someone brilliant had made terrible choices with good materials. Ancient geometric paneling lined the walls, warm and precise in the way ancient construction always was, but interrupted at intervals by Goa'uld modifications. Naquada conduit housings, staff weapon emplacements, crude power relay junctions soldered into systems designed for infinitely more elegant energy management. It reminded Carter of someone carving graffiti into a cathedral. Activation control will be at the structure's center, she said, scanner moving in precise arcs. The ZPM housing should be adjacent. Anubis will have it shielded, but the shield generator will be drawing from the same power circuit. If I can introduce a feedback loop into the relay junction before the sequence locks, the shield collapses and the ZPM is accessible. How long for the feedback loop? 40 seconds. Then 90 for the ZPM interruption. She glanced up. The remaining time is for everything going wrong. Generous allocation, Shaxx said. They moved fast and quietly, which was easier for Carter than for Shaxx, but Shaxx compensated through route selection, choosing the structural corridor junctions that provided natural sound dampening, staying in Carter's peripheral vision without crowding her operational space. 4 Jaffa guards on the inner corridor, standard patrol interval. Shaxx let Carter reach the junction point first, waited until her scanner confirmed the patrol's backs were turned, and then crossed the open space between positions in 3 strides that made no sound a Jaffa's ears could register. Carter was already working when Shaxx arrived at the junction. Her hands moved through the relay housing with the confident speed of someone who had been opening alien technology since 1997 and had long since stopped being intimidated by it. Sparks, a smell of ozone, and the faint whine of a power circuit being told to do something it hadn't been designed for. 30 seconds, she murmured. The alert klaxon started at 22. Not a patrol response. The structure's activation sequence had begun early. Through the wall paneling, Shaxx felt it before the instruments confirmed it. A deep harmonic vibration that resonated against his armor at a frequency uncomfortably close to the traveler's light. Ancient energy waking up and being directed somewhere it had never been designed to go. Carter. I know. 18 seconds. Jaffa were moving in the outer corridor. Shaxx put himself between the sound and Carter with the unhurried finality of someone making an architectural decision and stayed there. The first Jaffa came around the corner at a run and stopped when he registered what was standing in his path. And in the half-second of that hesitation, Shaxx's light came fully online for the first time since P4X639. Not controlled precision. Not the carefully managed output of a warrior compensating for Naquata interference. The full expression of centuries of light-forged combat, solar energy running gold through the joints of his armor, the suppressed fire of weeks of Naquata resistance converting instantly into output that made the corridor's lighting fixtures flicker and pop. The Jaffa went backward. The ones behind him went sideways. None of them were dead. Shaxx was still making choices even now, but the corridor was effectively closed. Done, Carter said. The shield collapsed with a sound like a held breath releasing. Carter was through the ZPM housing in 14 seconds, her tools precise and certain, and the feedback interruption she introduced into the power sequence was elegant in the way her work always was. Minimum intervention, maximum consequence, nothing wasted. The accelerator's activation sequence stuttered. The harmonic vibration in the walls changed pitch, rising sharply toward a frequency that made the Naquata conduit housings begin to stress fracture at the modification points. Exactly where Shaxx had predicted the structural vulnerabilities would express themselves. We need to leave, Carter said. Agreed. They ran. Behind them, the structure's interior began the specific kind of deterioration that happens when ancient systems are forced to absorb power they were never designed to contain. Not explosive, not immediately, on the Teltalk. Please tell me that on the Teltalk. Please tell me that shuddering I'm seeing in the sensor feed is good shuddering. The accelerator is compromised, Carter said, strapping in. ZPM interrupted mid-sequence. The structure will be non-functional within the hour. Anubis is going to be furious, Jacob observed, already spinning up the hyperspace drive. Yes, Shaxx said. He was looking at his hands, where the solar light was fading back to its baseline pulse, the Naquata interference reasserting itself now that the combat threshold had dropped. But it was reasserting differently than before. Carter's earlier observation proving accurate in real time. The resistance was meeting less resistance. The interference was becoming context rather than obstacle. He will also be looking for whoever did this. Let him look, Jack said over the radio. He will find us, Shaxx said. Not with alarm, with the calm assessment of someone who had been found by worse things and was still present to discuss the experience. That is acceptable. Finding us requires coming to us. A pause. I prefer engagements where the enemy chooses the ground. It tells you exactly what they believe their advantages are. The Teltalk entered hyperspace. Behind them, something on the moon began to glow very brightly. Anubis did not wait. The SGC's deep space sensors detected the fleet 18 hours after the Teltalk cleared hyperspace. 7 Haytok vessels dropping out of FTL in a dispersed assault formation that General Hammond's tactical staff recognized immediately as an Earth approach pattern. Not a probe, not a demonstration, an intent. The Prometheus was already in orbit running a scheduled systems check when the fleet appeared, and her commander had the good sense to begin evasive protocols before Cheyenne Mountain finished processing the sensor data. It bought minutes rather than hours, which was what they had. Hammond's voice over the gate room intercom was the voice of a man who had stood in this exact category of crisis before and intended to stand through this one too. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. SG-1. I need you in the briefing room now. Shaxx was already there. He had been in the briefing room for 3 hours, working through Carter's ZPM vulnerability analysis with the focused patience of someone who understood that the work done before a fight determined its outcome more reliably than anything done during it. When Hammond entered, Shaxx had the star map up, Anubis's fleet disposition plotted against Earth's orbital defensive capacity, and 2 yellow legal pads covered in notations that Carter later described as containing 4 separate tactical insights she hadn't considered. "He came himself," Shaxx said, without preamble. "The command vessel's energy signature is distinct, the half-ascended resonance." He pointed to the central Hatak in the fleet formation. "He wants to observe the asset personally. This is not purely a strike mission." "He wants you," Jack said. "He wants to understand what I am. Acquiring me serves that purpose. Destroying me, if acquisition fails, also serves it. It removes an unknown variable." Shaxx looked at Hammond. "He has made a tactical error." Hammond looked at the fleet disposition on the star map. 7 Hatak against Earth's current orbital defense. The Prometheus. The newly operational Asgard beam weapon on the Antarctic platform that they hadn't yet publicly acknowledged. And whatever SG-1 could manage on the ground. "Walk me through the error," Hammond said. "He has come in force because my light signature suggests a threat requiring force. But he has come personally because his half-ascended arrogance requires him to witness." "Those 2 imperatives are in conflict." Shaxx straightened. "A fleet commander stays with his fleet. A being who needs to witness gets close. You cannot do both effectively." Carter understood first. "If we can draw him out of the command vessel, the fleet loses coordinated tactical command. Hatak commanders are capable individually, but they operate on System Lord direction. Without Anubis issuing real-time orders, their response patterns become predictable." Shaxx looked at Jack. "I need to go back through the gate." Jack stared at him. "You want to go toward the fleet?" "I want to go to the ancient outpost the Antarctic survey team flagged 3 weeks ago and has not yet fully excavated." Carter's geological survey showed a control chair buried under 40 meters of ice. He met Jack's eyes directly. "If it functions for someone with the right gene. I have been in contact with ancient technology since arrival, and the ATA therapy Dr. Fraser administered yesterday showed a 93% compatibility result." "The therapy needs 72 hours to fully express," Carter said. "We have 18 minutes before the fleet enters weapons range," Shaxx replied. "I am willing to accept partial expression." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Hammond looked at Jack. Jack looked at Carter. Carter looked at her scanner results from 40 minutes ago when she'd been running routine post-mission checks and had noted the ATA expression beginning ahead of projected schedule and had not yet filed the report. "How partial?" Jack said. Carter pulled up the scan. 68% expressed. Enough to interface. Not enough to guarantee full drone capability. "Enough," Shaxx said. "Yin is a threshold I have operated above before." The Antarctic outpost was cold, in the way Antarctica was always cold, comprehensively, without apology. The excavation team had cleared enough ice to reach the outer chamber, but the control chair sat under a final layer that Shaxx removed in 40 seconds with an application of arc light that the glacier accepted without complaint. The chair was ancient ivory and geometry, elegant in its construction, waiting with the patience of technology that measured time in millennia. Shaxx sat in it the way he sat in everything, with the complete commitment of someone who had decided and was done deciding. The ATA expression hit the chair's interface protocols like a key, finding a lock that had been waiting longer than human civilization. The outpost woke up. Not fully. 68% was 68%. And the drone bays responded with the sluggish urgency of systems pulling power from reserves depleted by 10,000 years of Antarctic patience. But the targeting array came online clean, and the command interface met Shaxx's light halfway. The ancient technology and the traveler's gift recognizing each other across the vast distance of separate evolutionary paths, toward the same fundamental truth about what protected humanity. Above, the Prometheus reported drone launch. 31 drones, golden and precise, climbing toward Anubis's fleet in the targeting pattern. Shaxx pushed through the chair with everything he had. Anubis left his command vessel. Shaxx had been right about that. The half-ascended being descended toward Earth personally, drawn by the ancient energy signature pulsing from the outpost, unable to resist the proximity of what he had spent years trying to replicate. He came close enough to understand what he was facing. The remaining drones met him there. It was not enough to destroy Anubis. Nothing in the physical universe was quite enough for that. And 3 drones expended themselves against his half-ascended shielding before the fleet. Leaderless and suddenly uncertain, began the slow tactical withdrawal of commanders who had lost their center of gravity. Shaxx sat in the chair until the last Hatak entered hyperspace. The outpost settled back into its ancient patience around him, slightly warmer than before. The debrief took 4 hours and generated documentation that Hammond personally flagged for the highest classification level the SGC possessed, which was a classification level that officially did not exist and practically meant 3 people in Washington and nobody else. Shaxx sat through it with the same patience he'd brought to every debrief, answering questions directly, offering tactical assessments where relevant, and accepting Dr. Fraser's post-mission examination with the cooperative grace of someone who had learned that healers deserved respect and resistance, wasted everyone's time. The ATA expression had stabilized at 71% following the control chair interface, higher than before, as though the outpost had recognized something in him and adjusted accordingly. Fraser noted this in her report with 3 question marks and a recommendation for follow-up study. Carter had 17 follow-up studies already outlined before the debrief concluded. Jack said very little during the formal proceedings, which was how Jack processed things that had genuinely impressed him. The ratio of his silence to the significance of an event was something SG-1 had learned to read accurately over years of working together. This was the longest silence any of them could recently remember. Teal'c said, when Hammond asked for final observations, the fleet withdrew in a pattern consistent with loss of Central Command coherence. Anubis will not attempt a direct assault on Earth again in the near term. He will recalculate. A pause. He will also remember the control chair. Or he will want it. Then we finish excavating it, Shaxx said. And we make certain it is defended. We, Jack said. It was the first word he'd offered in 40 minutes. Shaxx looked at him. If the offer stands. Hammond's office had a view of the gate room through its internal window, which Hammond had always found useful. He could conduct administrative business while maintaining peripheral awareness of the facility's operational center. The gate sitting dormant between missions, chevrons dark, waiting with the patient readiness of a door that opened to everything humanity was still learning about the universe it lived in. He watched it now while Shaxx stood across the desk from him, the Titan's armor showing new scoring from the Antarctic cold and the arc light expenditure. The chest plate's luminescence steady and unhurried. I have spoken with the Joint Chiefs, Hammond said, and with the President, who sends his thanks through channels that will never appear in any document, but are genuine. He folded his hands. You are not from our universe. Your technology, your biology, and your capabilities fall outside every framework our program has developed for understanding allies and assets. You have no identification, no legal standing, no chain of command we can place you within. He paused. And you saved this planet. SG-1 saved this planet, Shaxx said. I contributed a chair. You contributed considerably more than a chair, and we both know it. Hammond studied him for a moment. I am offering you a formal position as a specialist consultant attached to SG-1 with full base access, mission participation authority, and the dubious honor of appearing in classified documents under a designation that will read Asset Pilgrim, because Colonel O'Neill named it, and I lacked the energy to argue. Something in Shaxx's bearing shifted. Not much, but enough. The particular stillness of a being who had spent centuries in motion encountering a moment that required genuine pause. My ghost is still missing, he said, somewhere in the dimensional transit. If it survived, it will be looking for my light signature. He looked at the gate through Hammond's window. 900 plus known gate addresses in your network. Several thousand more undiscovered. Each world a potential signal point. A pause that carried its own specific weight. I would need access to the gate network. That, Hammond said, is precisely what the position provides. Jack found him in the gate room an hour later, standing at the base of the ramp, looking at the inactive gate with the focused attention Shaxx brought to everything that mattered. The chevrons were dark. The room was quiet except for the ventilation hum and the distant sound of the night shift personnel going about the ordinary, extraordinary business of maintaining a facility that connected Earth to the stars. You know, Jack said, stopping beside him, most people who come through that gate uninvited end up causing us significant problems. I caused you significant problems, Shaxx said. You caused Anubis significant problems. There's a difference. Jack looked at the gate. Teal'c wants a rematch. Carter wants to run 17 more tests. Daniel wants to know everything about the Traveler and will talk for approximately 6 hours if you let him start. He paused. And I want to know if you can teach that control chair thing to anyone else with the ATA gene. Given sufficient training and time, Shaxx said, most things are teachable. That is what the Crucible taught me. He looked at the gate. What is the next address? Jack pulled a folded mission brief from his jacket pocket. Hammond had handed it to him on the way out of the office because Hammond understood timing. P7J-989, Ancient Outpost, possible ZPM storage, flagged 3 months ago. MALP showed ruins and what Carter thinks might be a secondary control chair interface. He unfolded it. Also some kind of energy reading she can't classify yet. Unclassified energy readings, Shaxx said, and something in his voice carried the warmth of a being returning to familiar purpose. I have some experience with those. Jack looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the gate. Dial it up, Walter, he called toward the control room. The chevrons began to turn. In the weeks that followed, the SGC's mission logs would carry a new notation beside SG-1's field reports, a secondary observer designation that Hammond's administrative staff learned quickly not to question. The Antarctic outpost continued its excavation under reinforced guard, its control chair interfacing more readily with each calibration session as the ATA expression deepened toward thresholds Fraser had stopped predicting because the predictions kept proving conservative. Anubis's fleet did not return, though Tok'ra intelligence suggested significant activity in deep space, consistent with a system lord reconsidering his assumptions. Carter's 17 follow-up studies produced 4 separate papers that would never be published anywhere and revolutionized the SGC's understanding of light-based energy systems. Teal'c and Shaxx sparred every Tuesday morning, and the gymnasium's attendance during those sessions reached numbers that technically violated the facility's occupancy regulations. Somewhere in the gate network, across 900 addresses and the spaces between them, a small artificial intelligence was following a light signature home. And in the gate room of Cheyenne Mountain, the chevrons turned toward a new address, and Lord Shaxx, Titan, Guardian, Crucible Handler, stepped through the wormhole into whatever came next. Because that was what you did when the gate was open and the mission was waiting, and the work of protecting humanity never finished. It only continued. Indeed, more stories await.